Today I'm going to talk about sort of my introduction to the Ultima series. And you may be wondering why I have a boxed TI-99 4A computer here. I will say Ultima, when I first played it, I think it was part 3 Exodus, reminded me a lot of Tunnels of Doom. So Tunnels of Doom was like one of the early, computer RPGs. There were a few out there, I guess. Graphical and design. And you had this loader, probably had the sprites and the characters and whatever, the loader here. And you either had to have a disk drive or a tape drive. And each of the tapes would have basically the game or the map, So this held the, whatever you needed to make your game. And you could buy a few maps. Like this is Pennies and Prizes, Quest for the King. And originally, I never had a tape drive for the TI. I found them at yard sales and stuff back in the day, and they never worked. They always ate up tapes or had a problem, including the several, I think, tape drives. This is one of my spare TI-99s. I think they got for free. I don't even know if it works. But you have a cartridge slot here. Put your loader in here. And if you had a peripheral expansion box or, a floppy drive, you would have like a floppy controller cart there with a ribbon cable on it. And then you load up your game that way. Or if you had a tape drive, you would hook it into like a DB9, serial connection there. I don't think that's an RS-232 compatible port because they sold, the peripheral expansion box had a RS-232 port, and I think you had like a sidecar RS-230 port, 232 port for your serial communications and modems and stuff like that. And this was the joystick port on the side. What's interesting is there's only one, and the TI-99 brand joysticks were horrible in my opinion, but you could get a Y adapter where you could hook your Atari 2600 joysticks and stuff in there. You just may be able to get your hands on like somewhat more modern, like a mini PEB. They got like 2 or 3 variations. This one has the what do you call it? It's got a memory card in it. It's not an SD card, but this little card will hold, pretty much the whole library on for your TI-99. As I was saying, Tunnels of Doom was an RPG, and it had kind of, if you've never played it, but you may have played like Pool of Radiance or something, kind of like a similar battle system as Pool of Radiance. And if you've played Ultima Exodus, there's kind of a similar, I guess, battle system in that. So we played this for years and did not even know it was called a role-playing game. Back in those days, role-playing games were usually pen and paper, books, Dungeons and Dragons, Dungeon Masters and all that stuff. And there were other, war games and stuff from, like, I think Avalon Hill and stuff. Unfortunately, I do not have Ultima Exodus anymore. I had it on the NES and possibly the Commodore 64. I know I had, like, Quest for the Avatar on the 64. And it was probably on multiple systems. I don't know if it was on, like, the Atari 600, 800, Apple II. But I'm sure it was on several systems. And, Ultima Exodus was not, in my opinion, that great of a game. Not the funnest game in the world. But I'm not really going to talk too much about the game, but how I kind of, there's kind of stories sometimes with things that have happened in your life. And my best friend that passed away, a year and a half ago or so, He was a little bit older than me. He was making characters on the game, transferring gold from, you get a certain amount of gold from having a new party. So he would redo his party over and over again, transfer his gold, redo his party, transfer his gold, and, that was kind of, I guess you could say it's a cheat, but it's also you work really hard and long for, doing that. So he got bored of doing that. So he said, I'll let you borrow my Ultima game for, if you do this for me, keep transferring money, make me so much money. So that's how I was introduced into Ultima Exodus, and I ultimately went and beat it. There were a couple little things, I think, where the sun and moonlight, there's a timing thing where, a village appears, at a certain time, based on that sun and moonlight or something. And I remember trying to fight a non-killable king or something in the game, and I wasn't dying, but I was powerful enough to keep the fight going, hours and hours and hours and hours on hours, but he never died. So I guess they made him where you couldn't defeat him. You wasn't really supposed to attack this king or whatever. And so I eventually gave up. I was powerful enough to kill him if he was killable, but he just wouldn't die. And being that was kind of my learning that this type of game was a role-playing game. A role-playing video game. So even though I played this guy for years, at least a couple years, we had the peripheral expansion box, speech synthesizer, and all that. Even though I played that for a few years, I did not know that it was even called a role-playing game. So I was into role-playing games. I really liked this game, and I played it along with the other games that weren't role-playing games, Alpine or Parsec, the Munchman, and even some of the Atari or whatever licensed games like the Pac-Man and stuff that come on here. Miner 2049er had a sidecar, slot. Maybe because you maybe access more memory or faster or something. I know that Miner 2049er on the Atari came out in two separate games. So you had to buy, part 1, part 2. But I think this one had the full game in the sidecar cartridge, which was kind of neat. Ultimately, I beat Ultima Exodus, and it wasn't such a great game that I wanted to play through it again. It's not like Eastbook 1 and 2. It's not like, Dark Wizard. Some of the games that, I played through Contra a million times. I played through, Legend of Zelda 1, 2, countless times. Super Mario 3, But, it was a game probably, of the older computer era, like the Commodore 64 and stuff like that. It kind of fit in that era, and it kind of seemed a little obsoleted by the Nintendo 8-bit era. Unfortunately, I never got to play like the Ultima Online stuff because, we are in a rural area, did not always even have like dial-up internet without paying like long distance costs. Always had problems with our connections because, the storms and we're on a rural phone service, that only, served rural services. So line noise, storms, going out all the time, probably not being able to afford the best, PCs back then. And, I was kind of introduced to, like, BBSing when 14.4 modems, were already out. People are still using, 2400 baud modems, 9600 baud modems, possibly a few in that 1200 baud range. But when I finally bit the bullet, it was that 14.4 error, you know, and I probably had no inclination to really play Ultima Online at the time. I couldn't really get into like Quest for the Avatar or anything like that. The only one I really played was Exodus, and it definitely reminded me a lot of this. And you know, I would play like Pool of Radiance on MS-DOS computers and stuff like that. It's possible that, you know, some of the other reasons why I did not play like massive multiplayer online RPGs until later is because we, you know, as people got dial-up internet around here, we may not have just been able to afford, you know, the dial-up internet and the massive multiplayer online RPG, you know, recurring monthly fees. Even if they were, you know, I don't know how much Ultima Online was, whether it was $5 or $10 or what, but, you know, everything adds up when you grow up in kind of a poor rural neighborhood, you know. Yard selling was, and flea markets were the two biggest, you know, ways that we would acquire games. You know, we didn't generally go by, you know, new releases. We might go to Eckerd's Drugs, you know, when that existed, and buy clearance stuff, you know, the stores, or maybe, you know, the companies, the publishers may have, you know, been clearing them out and saying, no, they're not selling in Kmart or whatever anymore. Let's just send all of our stock to Eckerd's Drugs, and you can buy them for, you know, $4 or $5 or whatever, you know, the games. And I do remember, like, going to Tennessee one time and them having much cheaper Nintendo games for, you know, used ones. You know, as the Nintendo still existed, you know, in the market, selling them at Toys R Us and stuff like that, there was a flea market, I don't know if it was around Chattanooga, that were selling games for $5 a piece. Almost any game you wanted. Come back down to Florida, and these used games were $20 or more, you know, and we could afford 4 games in Tennessee for the price of 1 used game in Florida. It didn't make sense, but, you know, yeah, we loved going on vacation, you know, in Tennessee and stuff, so let's go buy some Nintendo games.